Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, this is our deep dive episode on Season 3, Episode 2 of The Bad Batch, Paths Unknown, and I was inspired by these Slithervine creatures, which are in the audio description. That main one is described as rising kraken-like from the bubbling ooze. And it finally occurred to me that The Bad Batch, out of every other Star Wars series, whether live action or animated, has had more terrifying and dangerous creatures in its episodes than any other segment of Star Wars storytelling. So I went back through the entirety of the Bad Batch series to date. It started out in the second episode of the series with a Nexu showing up. A Nexu is that giant cat-like creature, the one that attacked Padme in the arena in Attack of the Clones. In episode 3, the Havoc Marauder was attacked by a thing called an Ordo Moon Dragon, which feeds off of pure energy, and they had to go into its lair to get stuff back from it. In episode 5, the first one where they did a job for Sid, they were told to pick up a kid named Moochie. Moochie turned out to be a juvenile rancor. And that episode also featured Brezics, which are these giant Zygarian gliding lizards too. So yeah, crazy. Then in episode 7, when the Batch goes to Braca to get the inhibitor chips removed from the Bad Batch, there's a Dianoga that pops up in there that nearly gets Wrecker. And then it's a little quiet on the creature front until episode 13, where the episode begins with the Batch coming back from a mission and telling Sid, yeah, you didn't tell us that this place was infested with Gundarks. We didn't get to see the Gundarks, but, you know, at least got a mention. And then there's a swarm of these creatures called Earlings. There's an infestation. This is part of that episode where Roland Durand first showed up. And speaking of Scorch, as we were on yesterday's episode, episode 14, that's the War Mantle episode, has a bunch of massives in it. Those are kind of like alligator dogs. We actually see them on Tatooine in the second season, first episode of the Book of not the Book of Boba Fett, The Mandalorian. And then in the final episode of season 1, there's a Comorodon sea dragon. I think that's how you say it, Comorodon sea dragon, that when the Bad Batch and Omega are trying to get off of Kamino while the orbital bombardment is happening there, they're in this tube underwater, and this sea dragon comes and like bites the tube to try to get at them. Then in season 2, at the very beginning, where the Bad Batch is pulling off that heist on a tropical island, there are these giant crabs. They're called aggro crabs. Yeah, I think that's a fun name. Then in episode 5, that's Entombed. That's where they go to that planet looking for some artifact with Phee Genoa. There's a creature, the planet is called Scaranal. There's a creature that still doesn't even have a name yet on Wikipedia, but it is a giant fanged reptile creature that attacks members of the Bad Batch. And then also there's, I guess, I don't know if you can technically count it, but you kind of can, that giant war machine that pops up that just starts lasering everything. Then in episode 6, when they end up on the planet Kashyyyk, they run into netcasters, which are, I think, a different kind of scary, ginormous arachnid that exists on Kashyyyk. Yeah, that's actually called a Y-Shock, something like that. WYYYSCHOKK. I guess they love their Y's and K's on Kashyyyk. But yeah, it's netcasters that show up in that Bad Batch episode. Then in episode 9, there's a herd of Ebisodon bucks that get riled up and go on a stampede, and the Bad Batch gets caught in the middle of that. Then in episode 11, that's the Metamorphosis episode we mentioned briefly on yesterday's episode of the podcast. That's where we see a juvenile Zillo Beast. We first saw the Zillo Beast in 2 episodes in the Clone Wars, and now it's, I guess, the return of the Zillo Beast is what that episode should be called. Then in episode 12, that's the Outpost, the episode where Crosshair just gets broken. Finally, one of the best episodes of the series, if not the best. There's a brief glimpse of and mention of ice vultures. There's no interaction with them, though the clone Mayday says that they are vicious creatures, but that you have to admire them. And the last one in season 2 happens on another situation where the Bad Batch is working with Phee Genoa. One of the people that Phee Genoa is meeting with releases Cahoon, I think that's how you say it. So if you remember those really crazy poisonous millipede creatures that Zam Wessel tried to kill Padme with in Attack of the Clones, that's what a Cahoon is. Then in season 3, we already have the Lurkahounds, which are these very aggressive dog-like creatures. Definitely not to be trifled with, despite the fact that Omega is able to domesticate one, because they have no problem attacking a creature as large as a Dryax, which we get to meet in episode 3 of season 3 of The Bad Batch. That's that giant two-legged walking werewolf-like creature. And then of course we got to see the Slithervines in episode 2, which did put me in mind a little bit of the Drengir from the High Republic Storytelling Initiative. It's definitely not the Drengir, but yeah, it has that same kind of like, oh god, these things are scary and relentless kind of vibe to them. So yeah, the Bad Batch creators definitely like their giant and or dangerous creatures, because there's been at least one in 17 of the 35 episodes that they've released so far. So that's what I've got for you in our deep dive inspired by Paths Unknown, which is episode 2 from season 3 of The Bad Batch, and that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. If you haven't done so yet, I hope you'll consider leaving a rating or review on the podcast on your app of choice, and I hope you'll consider also hitting the subscribe or the like or the follow or the join button, whichever the app offers you. Those two actions help more people find this Daily Dose of Star Wars Joy, and so does telling another person you know that likes Star Wars and may like podcasts as well to check this out. And if you really enjoy this podcast and want to help support its creation as we continue toward our 10th anniversary in July, all you have to do is head over to patreon.com/SW7X7 and check out how it works. Now it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.